Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well and ready for a great webinar this afternoon. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe, and I'm here to welcome you and introduce you to today's speakers. We are pleased to welcome Plume for today's webinar. Plume have recently become a strategic partner of CTAM Europe, and we're delighted to have them with us here today for the first time. You'll see on screen Adam Hotchkiss, Plume's co-founder and VP Product, and David Wagenborg, VP Connectivity and B2B Products at Liberty Global. David has had a seat on the CTAM Board of Directors for the last 2 years. So today's webinar is scheduled for around 45 minutes. Adam will present for the first 30 minutes and then we'll open to you all for questions. 15 minutes will give us plenty of time for a great Q&A session. Please use your Q&A button on your screen as opposed to the chat function so we can keep all the questions together on the Q&A section. This recording will be on the members only section of ctameurope.com, and non-members will receive temporary login details so you can view this and past webinars and podcasts from both CTAM Europe and CTAM US. You'll also receive information on our executive management program, which we hold annually at INSEAD. So thanks again for joining, and I will hand you over to Adam and David. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm really honored and excited to host and moderate this webinar with our new partner, Plume. On a personal level, I've been impressed with Plume. Their vision, ability, and execution power has also been one of the key elements and reasons, of course, why Liberty Global decided to sign a deal at the back end of last year for all our households to get adaptive Wi-Fi as the first phase of deployment of Plume in our footprint. And one of the driving forces next to Fari, the current CEO of Plume and founder, is I think one of the best product visionaries in our industry, which is Adam, who's co-founder and the product responsible. So Adam, over to you for your view on how to increase your revenue with a solid smart home strategy. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, David, very much. So today we're going to talk about several things today related to the total cost of ownership and how Plume and our customer experience management platform can help to achieve the goals that you have over the next couple of years. The first thing we'd like to point out is we've been around for several years, and we've been deploying over those years in many of the main ISPs you see here listed on the screen. So today we have a total of over 50 ISPs active with our system in over 15 million homes, and we've had over 700 million devices that have connected to our system and our platform that we control the experience of. So this is really a large-scale system deployment that can be deployed in ISPs of tens of millions of households, all the way down to ISPs who have a few tens of thousands of households that they want to offer catered, customized service to. Okay, so today we wanted to also touch upon the way that things are changing in our environment, and I think that this is relevant especially to COVID-19. And we've been watching very carefully about what's been happening since COVID-19 and stay-in-home orders have been placed across the world. And we saw that the number of people working at home has increased almost 100%. So almost twice as many people on their computers and laptops doing Zoom calls just like this all around the world. And we've been able to track the amount of activity that's been producing. One thing that we noticed alone just from people being at home and working is the amount of bandwidth that's being consumed by these devices is going up very high. But the thing that's interesting is it doesn't just happen during the daytime. You would expect large spikes that you see here during daytime hours, but it also continues into the evening hours. So people being at home, consuming more content, either over the top or via video over IP is starting to become a large growth segment within our industry, and we don't expect that to change over time. So we'll see what happens in the next couple of months as things kind of people start going back to work, and this will shift a little, but we expect a lot of this increase to remain permanent. And the things that we've learned from this is a bit of a wake-up call for us. So it is a main shift in how we view internet and the services that we have at home. If I'm working at home, is my connection really secure all the time? Meaning, am I able to have a Zoom call without a single disruption during that video conference call? And we also see the need for speed, and not in terms of megabits per second, but the need to be able to react very quickly to consumer demands. So if all of a sudden you see half your people now are starting to work from home, your customers, how do you scale up your operations to meet that demand? How do you make sure they have all the services in place so that if they work from home, they have unbelievable connectivity and they have cybersecurity protection to help them make sure that they're safe when they work at home? And if they have children or teenagers like all of us do, to make sure that you can have a separation of a workspace and parental controls for your children to make sure that they don't mix and interfere with your livelihood. So the bottom line that we want to get to is that this is really now the time to start investing in your infrastructure to be able to offer these services before the next seismic shift occurs. We don't want to wait. This is really the time to act now, do the investment, and be prepared for the future. Okay, so we're going to talk about a lot of the macroeconomic effects, not just related to COVID, but what's going on around the world. And the two things that we're seeing that I think everybody can sympathize with from the ISP side is that the number of video and voice subscribers is declining at a fairly alarming rate. There was a major carrier in the US last quarter who announced over 1 million subscribers has left the video side, and that was a bit of a shock. But I think people actually started to expect this, that the number of video customers are going to start churning out if we don't have a very good video product to offer them against the competition. And that competition is over the top with Netflix and Hulu and other services. As a result, number two comes in line with that. The more people that you have leaving video and voice services, the more churn that you're going to have. So if you offer just a single service to the customer, such as broadband, they're likely to churn in the range of 15 to 20% year over year. And that constitutes a very high cost. It's not easy to turn a profit in the first year because of the upfront investment you have to make to get that customer with CAC and CapEx. So we need to make sure that we're changing our network services in order to keep those customers for a longer period of time. So I think this relays into the point three, in which you cannot just offer anymore a dumb pipe kind of internet. And I think a lot of people are in the speed in terms of megabits per second game to say, if I can offer you 1 gigabit per second, or I see people even offering 1.5 gigabit or 2 gigabit per second and a lower price, that you'll come over and be my customer. That's a bit of a trap. These dumb pipes, as fast as they may be, don't really affect the customer experience once you get beyond a few hundred megabits per second. Your customer is not really going to notice that speed, and they're very likely to churn before when their 1-year contract is up to go to the next provider if they have services on top that really change their home experience. So we need to really avoid this dumb pipe trap, and we'll talk about how we do that next. Finally, there's competition that's coming. So no longer are ISPs just competing against other ISPs. You're really now competing against Google and Amazon and Apple, because they're coming into the home with IoT devices and voice assistants and video over the top to directly compete and take away some of that revenue. So now's the time to invest in new services to offer. And really the benefit that the ISPs have in this case is you already have a long-standing billing relationship with that customer. You have the payment information, you have a reoccurring payment account with them, and that's fairly difficult to get. And when you have that, you have the upper hand. So you're on high ground in this, and now it's just the time to get more services to fend off the competition. Okay, so how we're going to do that, we're going to talk about our piece in that, which is called the Plume Customer Experience Management Platform. So this platform is split up into 3 pieces. One is called HomePass, and HomePass is everything that the consumer will see. So we run a direct-to-consumer business that everybody can see on our website, plume.com. We've taken that service and brought that into the ISP and customized it to be able to be delivered and managed on the back end. So all the items related to excellent connectivity with our adaptive Wi-Fi service, cybersecurity and parental controls and other functions that we'll talk about a little bit later on, those become direct features that you can offer to consumers as new services. But all these new services that you deploy, they're nothing unless you can manage them on the back end and you can see that the customer experience is excellent. So that's where Haystack comes in. And Haystack is all of our backend tools. So we have a full suite of backend tools and integrations that'll work with your back office systems, your OSS and BSS systems to do billing and provisioning and customer lifecycle management, as well as tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 support. So if the customer has any issue, you can be right on top of it. We also build call center support tools. So if there is an issue, we can pinpoint it immediately to the customer on the phone and walk through some elements to fix it. And there's even some proactive management tools to go after customers who may be experiencing poor service and offer them solutions before they call or churn out. So all this is available in Haystack. Along with that, we have information that can be viewed for customers to get market insights. So how much are customers using particular features? What type of customers do you have? Do they have many devices? Do they have a few devices? When's the last time they got a new iPhone, for example? Do they have Xbox or PlayStations? How many? Are they watching Netflix on them, etc.? These are all marketing questions that you can use to tailor campaigns to your customers or services through Harvest. And all three of these are built upon OpenSync. And OpenSync is the firmware platform that's open sourced and available to be deployed across all the gateways in your home to enable the services to talk to the Plume Cloud. So that's the foundation to get the control over the customer experience. So there's a few areas that we're going to focus during this call, and I want to cover those now. So number one is absolutely important and critical is that we're able to raise the monthly revenue from consumers. So we need to find services that consumers will pay for and then roll those out and then offer packages that customers will see value in to increase the price. So we'll talk about that first. Next is while we're doing that and deploying the system, we need to lower the operational costs, and that's in the form of call-in rates or truck rolls for customers that have issues. So adding all these backend systems in Haystack that we talked about, along with the cloud control, will lower call-in rates and truck rolls, and that results in a lower cost overall. And then if the customer is satisfied through all these services and improved service level, then the churn will also increase. So we've been measuring people who use the Plume platform and what that does for their churn within their network, and we've shown some pretty large reductions that we'll cover here in a little bit. Okay, so how did we come up with these numbers for this study? So number one is we looked at tier 1 and tier 2 ISPs, and we looked at the customer records of those ISPs. So there's over 2 million call-in records that we looked at over 9 months to come up with the numbers that we're about to show in the study. And that's really for people who call it in for any sort of reason. I forgot my Wi-Fi password, all the way down to my video streaming is not working on my box. I don't have any connectivity. So we rated the calls and the types and measured the number of truck rolls and calls we can reduce as a result of these call-in records. And we were also able to categorize why people are calling and why they're unsatisfied and if we're able to help them. Right, so the summary of the findings are here. So I'll cover each one of these in some detail here in the next slides. Number one, I want to focus on the top left is ARPU. We need to have new methods of ARPU in order to make this successful within the customer. And we've been able to show an increase between $10 and $15 per month ARPU. And that's achieved by many ways. So one way is by providing whole home Wi-Fi. So if customers don't have enough coverage in their home and they need better Wi-Fi service, then that's really something that can be solved for 30% of this population who's afflicted by low coverage through the Wi-Fi extenders and adaptive Wi-Fi system that we provide. There's also increase in revenue that can be given for new services. So if you have smart services running on your platform versus the competitor who's just offering that dumb pipe that we talked about earlier, then you can command a higher price. And I'll show you some examples of that we did a survey for carriers who are doing this about the way that they've been able to raise their price for their customers by offering additional services. Second, for call-in rates and truck roll rates, we were able to reduce those by over 50% call-in rates, and truck rolls reduced by 2/3 by giving all the tools we have in Haystack, which is the back-end systems. So if a customer calls, you're able to solve that call for the first time, and then the customer won't call again is one way. But also more importantly is if you give a system which is intelligent and managed by the cloud, then that system keeps on getting better as the algorithms improve, and then that prevents the problems from occurring, and then the customer doesn't have to call because the problem is resolved remotely by the cloud before it gets to the point of frustration when the customer calls. So both these things together solve over half the calls and 2/3 of the truck rolls. I mentioned here on the bottom left churn, so we were able to reduce churn by 30%. And that's really an extension of making sure the customer is happy. So giving them services that they use, having a mobile app they can integrate with, solving their main pain points, that's going to result in reduced churn. And we've been able to measure over 30% reduction in churn, which is a massive savings to the lifetime value that you get from the customer. Operational costs, and in terms of feature development, you see here there's a speed to market that's increased by 2/3, really by decoupling the firmware from cloud control. So moving all your services up to the cloud and virtualizing those functions allow you to do deployments every 3 weeks, for example, as opposed to many, many months that it takes to do a firmware and test and roll out. And then operational costs are really saved by the use of a mobile app for self-install and self-care, and also the relation of the longevity of the customer you get, and the reduced calls as a result. So we'll walk through each of these cases, but these are kind of upfront, the numbers that we saw during the study. So let's go one more deep dive here into each of these items. So first is, what services can you offer to the customers, and how can you make this a kind of a cornerstone of your roadmap? So number one is adaptive Wi-Fi. So this is the base on which you build everything on. If you can't do this correctly, then the customers will never buy into the other features because they just can't use them. So being able to have this connectivity everywhere inside of the house and to make sure it's rock solid, it's not just an extender type of proposition where you're doing Wi-Fi everywhere in the house. It's also about, if you just have a single gateway, how you do steering of clients, and how you have a reliable connection that's devoid of interference in your neighbors and is able to adapt in real time to what's happening. So this is something that we view as the cornerstone of our features, and then we build upon those other features. And the first one is security. So this is cybersecurity to keep your family safe. So every single device in the house can be kept safe using AI-based security, and this is protecting threats outside on the internet from either outgoing threats that your devices are talking to, or incoming threats, people trying to hack and get through your firewall and talk to devices and implant some malware on those devices inside your home. Next is home awareness, and this is really related to being able to see what's going on inside of your house at what time. And this is physical motion, so we have motion detection capabilities. So in different areas of your house, you can see when that's happening, and that allows you to view when people are coming and going, or if you see motion when nobody's at home, you want to be aware about it. Or you can even check the sleep patterns of your house to see when people are turning in and going to sleep, or when people are waking up and the house is the most busy. So this awareness drives engagement from your customers to come into the mobile app, and that's important for churn reduction. And lastly, access controls, which is related to twofold. One is you have many guests that come into your house. You want to be able to give them access, but you want to be able to make sure that it's safe and secure and personalized. So we provide passwords for every guest coming in to make sure that they can access only the devices that they're allowed to, and only at the time that we permit them to. And then secondly, you have children, and you need to provide parental controls. So parental controls means that you can filter content going into your house. So if you have a child and you shut off their laptop between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., for example, that's one part. But when they are on the laptop, you want to make sure that they're not able to go to websites that have material that's not applicable to what they should be seeing. So we can filter out things like drug paraphernalia or pornography or other type of things which can be harmful for children. So all this gets managed through the Plume app, which drives engagement. Okay, so we talked about what does that matter now? So if you have all these services, are you able to monetize that? And the answer is yes. And so the way that we looked at this, we did a survey of carriers, and this is mostly in the US. So the US market has been deploying these kind of services for a while, and now it's starting to pick up in adoption. And there's some low value carriers, and what I mean by low value carrier, that's one who just provides that dumb pipe. So you come to the ISP, you order a sufficiently fast pipe, they deliver to you for some amount of money, but the cost leader in the market, if you will, but they don't offer any services on top because that requires some investment in architecture to do so. And as a result, they're always going to be the low value or low cost leader in the market, but not the highest value one. And then you have some medium value carriers, and these are ones that will offer, for example, one of the 4 services I mentioned to you before. So maybe they have like a mesh-based Wi-Fi system that doesn't really work very well, but maybe does a checkbox feature that they can deploy. Maybe they offer like an antivirus that you can download and install, but doesn't get much traction. But as a result of this, they are able to increase their price, and you can see here you get some jump in revenue that you can offer over the low value carrier. But where we need to be and where we need to push all the carriers to go is to have a smart system with multiple services and engagement. And we saw in our survey that you can have a 50% increase in your monthly fees for customers if you offer those smart services, if you deploy them widely in your network, and you advertise those services. So all 3 of these things have to be met. And as a result, you can increase the operational profit of your network. So that's on the ARPU side. The second one is related to longevity. So it's one to increase ARPU, but if you're not able to stem churn inside of your network, then it's hard to make that profit. So we looked at customers who had the Plume system and those who don't, and we looked at the churn as a result. So if you do not have a smart services platform and you're offering, let's say, this dumb pipe service, then your average lifetime of your customer is about 6.8 years. So that means this is a blend across people who have just internet service or those who have video, double play or triple play services. The average you'll see is about 6.8 years. In reduction of that churn by offering them more services, so offering them the smart home services, it almost becomes like if you will, a 4-play type service that you can now offer. And we saw the average then increase go up by almost 3 years to about 9.7 years. So during this 3-year period, you don't have to spend CAC to get a new customer. Your operational expenses are very low because the network is always up and running at that point. You don't have to spend new money on CapEx, and it just becomes a very high profit center for the carrier the longer you can go with the same customer. So we saw an increase of about $2,000 in the lifetime value of the customer. So that's operational cash flow that was increased by about $2,000 over the life by offering these smart services. So second, we also looked at operational cost, and really when you get to operational cost, it comes down to a few things. Number one is the longer you keep the customer, then the less you have to pay for things like marketing, CAC, and installation and CapEx fees. So that alone becomes a large operational cost savings. And second is we see service installation being a large item that we want to improve upon. And that's where you can install hardware using just a mobile app. You can add new services using the mobile application as well. And there's self-help you can do. So the customer doesn't have to call in if they have an issue. They can solve it directly there in the mobile app. So this reduction in calls and truck rolls and self-installation without having to send technicians to the home to do that, that really lowers the amount of CapEx you have to, the amount of OpEx that you have to spend on customer from the range of about $135 per year of that customer being in service to about $86. So there's a 37% increase. So this is something we see as, just the increase in revenue alone and the churn helps, but you also want to reduce OpEx because it's a very important balance sheet item that's reported upon financially. And on top of that, part of the reason why the OpEx is lower is related to reduction in calls. So we looked at these call records I mentioned earlier for over 2 million customers, and we saw that there was a trend that was developing within these customers. So we went back to this day 0 here is where customers installed Plume within their house. And this was automatically installed using the mobile app for installation and over the backend systems to update the software on the gateway to support it. And then we went back 60 days from there to see, well, what were the customers doing 60 days prior to installing Plume? And what we saw was, surprised us a little, but it was more logical the more we looked at it. So we did expect customers would have more issues. If you have more calls related to connectivity, which is the blue part of this graph, which is the dominant factor in the decision making. This green part is also wireless setup, so people are getting very frustrated having to set up their modem. They think there's something wrong. They start rebooting it. They try to log in. They can't log in. They just kind of give up, and then they call. You know, those are kind of main contributing factors to why people are upset. The surprising part we saw here is that the speed at which it kind of ramped up, and then after I explain it, it'll make more sense. So you see people are generally calling at a higher rate here 60 days out, and then when you get to about 20 days out or so, it really starts to ramp up, and we think that's where people are just getting really frustrated. They're having issues, they're rebooting things, it's not working, they're calling, maybe they're calling multiple times. And as you get closer to the decision to where the ISP can say, hey, you know, we should really provide you with some more services. We have a new product that's provided by Plume, and we can install that instantly and ship you some extenders if you have a large house, and then do the install. Leading up to that, the frustration is super high. After we install Plume on their system, they download the mobile app, they go through the onboarding process, then you see it falls dramatically. And then over time, it keeps on getting less and less and less over time. So as the cloud takes over for some of these controls, as the customer engages in the mobile app, as we solve their connectivity issues, you can really go from a binary, very, very upset customer who's going to churn to a customer who's more happy than your base. So this is just proof about the reduction in calls and truck rolls that can be had by the deployment of these services. Okay, so we wanted to look at also return on investment. So this customer is going to be around for a long time. So let's plan this for the long term. Let's see what the increase in profit is. And so we mapped out 2 different paths you can take. So one path is where you offer the same services you have today, which is this gray line. And the customer, after the first year is kind of the break-even year that you have the customer. You have to pay some marketing CAC. You can't really get rid of that cost. You have CapEx. You're collecting revenue, but your almost goal is to kind of break even the first year. After that, it's pure profit that you're trying to collect from the customer. So since you're not able to charge as much revenue because you don't have good services to attach that to, then you see that the amount of profit that you get year over year is kind of following this linear trajectory. And then after year 6 into year 7, the customer is going to churn. So that's the average life cycle we saw was about 6.7 years. And without services to keep that customer engaged, they're going to churn, and you kind of lose that customer lifetime value at that point, which is why it goes flat. With the Plume system, you see we're able to increase the revenue over time by adding new services. And then the customer is going to stay longer and not churn. So even when you get past like year 7 up to year 10, then the profit increase is increased dramatically. So making an investment today is really going to set up the company in the future to keep on increasing the benefits to the customer and the lifetime value. So you have to think of this as an investment you're making, not just for I'm trying to stem off the problem today. It's really about investing in the future, and this is kind of proof that we saw during the lifetime value calculation. So at the end, you end up with 73% higher profit from the customer than before. So let's talk about the 3 different ways to roll out the system. So we've had a lot of experience in the market of rolling out the system, and not all ISPs are the same, and not all ISPs have the same kind of capabilities to roll out products. So we'll look at 3 different options. So one is doing a full-scale rollout. So you say just instantly you upgrade 100% of the customers. They get new software within their existing gateways. They connect to the cloud, and this is the most efficient way to roll it out. And companies such as Liberty Global, for example, have an excellent infrastructure with the ability to be able to do this. But it may not be possible 100% of the time because the investment in the gateway may be stranded. It may be very old, and it may not be possible to kind of update it with the software. So then you have to start looking at 2 other options. So one is you can do an individual upsell. So that's where you go and target the customers in which you feel are most applicable to buy the service. You charge them a price for it. Maybe you ship them some extenders if they need it in order to increase the coverage of the home. But along with this upsell, they get some new hardware to really improve the service in their home. And we call that kind of an over-the-top model for the service package. And that's a 1-by-1 upsell along with the marketing campaign. And the last one is a new customer rollout. So anytime you make this your base level service, anytime you have a new customer that comes into the network, and I mentioned kind of the churn rates that we would see earlier on, every time a new customer comes up, you give them the smart home service by default. And then you're able to raise your price according to the competitor, and then all new customers will get it. And then we'll look to see, well, how long does it take then to reach like 100% penetration with each of these different models. So the first one I mentioned is here. So if you are able to upgrade the firmware with OpenSync on your gateways and connect to the cloud to run the services, then you can go from 0 to 100 in just instantly in one day. And that'll give you a profit increase of 18% over where you're standing today with these new services. And so that's kind of the golden way of deploying it. Now, we talked about that may not be possible in all ways. So one way is to do the individual upsell. So we saw upsell has some advantages in that you can run marketing campaigns, you can get customers to really buy in and see the value, and they're going to stay your customers for a long time. But the growth rate we see is not as high as we want it to be. So after 5 years, you still kind of have a 77% shortfall in terms of penetration to get to where you need to be. So we've looked at the way to do it is to include individual upsell with new customer rollout. So if you offer new customers the service by default, then within 5 years, you'll reach that 100% penetration rate. And this is really the combination of settings that you need to do in order to have a ramp rate that's applicable to being able to hit most of your customers in the network. So we really recommend that if you can go the 100% model, do it. We'll work with you. We'll work with the ODMs to get OpenSync integrated in your gateways and go. If not, you really need to do a combination of these two: new customer rollouts, individual upsell, and marketing on your side to really show the value to the customer and get that ramp rate going. Okay, so we'll end there here. I think we've covered here these 4 items. So really want to get this the point out here that this is an investment to make now, not one to wait on. And we're eager to kind of talk to you and walk you through and give some demos. We have trial packages also that you can take to your home and run yourself and see the service. And all the reduction in OpEx and CapEx, we can also give you access to the backend tools so you can see firsthand. Most customers we have, they can get up and running in 45 days. So that's from contract signature to first customer online through these upsell and new customer addition models I talked about earlier. And we also have a full team that's available to work with your ODMs to do integration into your gateways if you want to go for the full step approach day one. If you have gateways in the field that are investments that you made, we can help you also recoup that with our integration team to get hooked up to our cloud system. Okay, so with that, here's my contact information. You can email me always at adam@plume.com, and we'll answer your questions or direct you to somebody who can help you get started and set up with our system. But now we'll go into Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Amazing, all the insights. It's so impressive. One of the reasons I was so impressed with Plume. It's all factual, but really great. But let me kick off the Q&A, and just for the wider audience, we have a specific box where you can drop your questions. So feel free to drop any over there. I think Adam, one of the reasons also we as Liberty Global have obviously chosen for Plume, and you touched on that a little bit, is adaptive Wi-Fi, and what is really differing adaptive Wi-Fi from just plain mesh Wi-Fi. Can you touch on that a little bit further? Yeah,
thank you for the question. So there's a lot of terms out there in the market on mesh Wi-Fi as kind of being the generic term to mean whole home Wi-Fi. So you have some extenders in the house, you can connect them to a backhaul network and provide coverage in the house where you normally didn't have it. But we see that was not enough. So you have to look at connectivity with Wi-Fi in 3 different areas, not just one. So coverage is one, and that one is fairly straightforward. You put in an extra AP, you see a stronger signal, you have coverage, and so your phone thinks it's happy, but you know that the performance there might not be good. So the second thing you have to worry about is time dependency. So why your phone may see a strong signal but not be good is related to what your neighbors are doing. So if your neighbors are very busy and your neighbors are consuming a lot of the bandwidth, and that's shared with you, then you'll start to see things slow down. So especially if you live in something like an apartment complex or a kind of a dense urban environment, you might notice between the hours of 6 and 10 p.m., things start to slow down, and whatever used to be fast in the day is now slow at night. So you have to adapt to that when it happens. So if your neighbor all of a sudden starts downloading Netflix and they take up all that airtime, you have to really switch to a new channel and reconfigure your network in real time. So that's the time dependency. The third one is related to load. So load is about how much capacity you need to different parts of your house and devices at different times. So if you have a particular load that you're putting on your network, and maybe it gets busy between the evening hours because you watch TV in your living room and you have your children on iPads, for example, that are watching video as well, then the system needs to be able to predict what that load is going to be and then set up the backhaul network in such a way to deliver that load. And we've built a complete system that runs in the cloud to do that optimization. That's part of our adaptive Wi-Fi experience. And this load works if you have extenders, or even if you just have a single gateway, you need to be able to handle this interference management and steering to be able to handle the load. It's equally important. It's not just about coverage.
Great. I think we have quite a number of questions also now from the Q&A. I think an interesting one is what operator did Plume partner with to perform this proof of concept, Adam?
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear the question. Okay, I see. So we've been partnering. For the exact study, I understand the question. So the data that we use for the study is twofold. So one is we have market data that we took from all the operators that we work with. So I showed information earlier. We have over 50 ISPs up and running, 700 million devices connected, and we use the data from there to determine if a customer has issues with their network or not, to try to estimate their happiness. The call records that we got in terms of how many people called and why they called, that was from a tier 1 operator. There was over 2 million customers, and we monitored the call records for 9 months. That was a North American operator. We can't give the name, but that was a North American operator who had deployed the system for over a year at that point, and we analyzed the call-in records during that time they were rolling out the system.
I think one of the other questions, Adam, is also if you see the same economies of scale around the multi-dwelling units, such as apartment complexes or large other properties. Can you elaborate on that one?
Yes, so the MDU environment is very unique. So the first thing is related to adaptive Wi-Fi. We have to treat MDUs differently than we treat homes that are less dense. So number one is you'll never be able to find a completely clean Wi-Fi environment within an MDU. So you always have congestion that's coming in from neighbors. Some of those neighbors may be even multiple floors away, and even if you don't know that person, they will be interfering with your connectivity in your network. So the algorithm changes in such a way that it becomes a group optimization. So we take all the dwelling, the apartments inside of the MDU, and then optimize across that dwelling. So we look to see what the load requirement is for each customer, and then put them on a spectrum that would be able to handle that load. So if you don't use your internet very often, let's say if you're 50 or higher and you're not really friendly with technology any longer, you just maybe send emails every once in a while, then we'll put you on a spectrum that's more busy, because you're not going to notice that. But if you're a gamer, for example, you watch a lot of Netflix, you have 4K TVs in your house, your load is very high, and so we need to put you on a channel which doesn't have much interference and has a lot of spectrum available to you. So there we would put that person on a less loaded channel for them to have the best experience. So this has to be really done in a predictive nature. MDUs are very predictable, meaning between the evening hours, it really spikes up the interference. and then it goes back down. So it's something that the cloud can predict based on history. And if you don't have cloud control over that, then you leave it up to the actual access point itself locally. It just won't be able to coordinate. So we see most of the changes at MDUs are related to optimization, and we've done studies and saw dramatic decreases in interference after the algorithms are run.
Maybe a good question to add to this. So when you look at the ideal deployment of Plume and the integration of the Plume agent in existing modems, or should we, should people consider a Plume-ready mesh device? What's your view on that?
Right, so a lot of that depends on the investment that you've made in the architecture up to this date. So I can give you an example of two different cases. So one case where you may have an ISP who's invested in good gateway hardware that they deployed in the customer locations. It's fairly capable and has longevity, and it's not something that's very old. So with that infrastructure in place, then the best approach is to upgrade the firmware within that gateway to run OpenSync. And OpenSync is compatible with all the different major chipset manufacturers. So if you have Intel or Qualcomm or Broadcom or Quintenna, then all those chipsets are compatible. And as I mentioned earlier, we have an integration team who can help work with your ODMs to make that happen. On the flip side, you may have some ISPs that haven't invested in the gateway environment, and so you may have very old equipment. So it may be 5, 6, 7 years old, for example. And while we see things like DOCSIS and fiber, those mediums kind of live on for 10 or more years before you need to upgrade the modem there. The Wi-Fi can get old very quickly. So if you have that type of situation, then it's best to go with an over-the-top strategy to where we can deploy very quickly extenders and gateways that we have in our arsenal that can get you up and running very fast. And then form with you a longer-term strategy. So maybe your strategy going forward is to either put in more capable gateways or to split up the gateway and the modem. So it may be better for you to have an ONT and a router inside of the house instead of doing a combination in order to keep up with the fast-changing Wi-Fi protocols. So we're happy to go over both situations, and we have case studies and examples we can share with you.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, obviously a lot of questions also around COVID-19. One of them is the carriers like Comcast have performed remarkably well during this COVID-19 period from a customer service and lack of service interruption perspective, which is really impressive, despite all the increases from working from home, of course. Do you have specific Plume-related metrics as the person who's asking the question is thinking that Plume has played a strong role in all of this?
Okay. So there's a couple of things that we looked at specifically to make sure that we're able to handle the increase in capacity. So there's one side you mentioned, the ISP. So the ISP saw a big jump in capacity, and that's more about network planning. So if you can find the bottlenecks in the backbone network or in the local loop network and kind of invest some new CapEx to increase capacity, those are kind of fixes that are more linear. Inside the home, it's a bit different because now inside the home, you built in a Wi-Fi, for example, infrastructure that can handle the capacity. But is the service maintaining the level of performance as you had before, as would now? Because this is now a good proof point for us. So number one, we check to see, are people actually staying at home and using more bandwidth? And the answer to that is yes. And we chronicled this. If you go to platform.plume.com, and you see right there on the page, you can go and check to see the level of people working at home and the amount of bandwidth there. We saw a pretty dramatic increase. But increase in capacity is one thing, but were those customers seeing a good experience is another. So we also looked at the quality of experience, and at Plume we have a quality of experience indicator that tells us, for example, if a set-top box is able to get enough capacity with good latency in order to stream a video. So we also looked then to see pre-COVID and post-COVID with the increased bandwidth, our set-top boxes and our computers and all our phones able to get enough bandwidth with low latency in order to run the applications? The answer is yes. We saw almost no difference in our QoE indications, which means the system can handle that capacity. And we even do kind of crazy tests where we run in our test house like 10 Zoom calls simultaneously to make sure the system can handle the capacity there. And we saw very clearly that the system has much more capacity to give than what's being used. But we expect over the years that this capacity will continue to rise, and we're investing in things like Wi-Fi 6 deployments and things to stay ahead of the curve. So we don't have any concerns as long as the system is up and running and the cloud is controlling it. We can keep up with these changes.
Okay. Yeah. So the next question is on network monitoring. As you have shown in your presentation, you have a lot of data. But obviously for operators, it's important to get the whole picture from customer perspective, but also from ISP perspective, where exactly happens what. And what do you see as the role for Plume in all of that? Instead of operators needing that they need to swivel between multiple systems.
So there's three different levels that we'd look at, and one we talked about earlier, which is more of a call center or engineering level to be able to go down to a customer's home and solve the issue. And I think that one is pretty straightforward. That's more of a call center type environment. But you also want to see at the network level what's happening, and there's two different phases you want to see at the network level. One is you want to be able to see operationally, is the network running fine? So there's obviously a lot of changes that are happening on the network, which just comes to light, and COVID things tend to happen very quickly. But even before COVID, there's changes, there's updates, there's new customers coming online, there's new applications that are consuming more bandwidth. So at an operational level, we provide dashboards to tell you that the network is running fine, that we're able to meet KPIs of performance, that we're able to see growth rates that we expect. And we also map out things like churn and new customer activations, so you can see that the value is still there with the customer over time as you roll out new services and you start different marketing campaigns. The second level that you want to get to is really more about information or profiling of what's happening on your network from customers. So, and that's more in the harvest side. So you not only want to see that you are getting more customers, but what type of customers are you getting? So are your customers those who are power users, for example? Do they have many devices in their house or just a few? Are they people who have multiple computers, for example, and multiple TVs? Do they have Wi-Fi speakers such as Sonos? Or are they more the customers you're getting have very few devices and they're not kind of early adopters? So kind of understanding the profile of your customer is also very important, so you know how to market and you can see the results of your marketing campaigns for the customers you're getting. And lastly, you also want to keep up with the applications that are running. So we have a feature within our system that allows us to see what applications are running. We're rolling this out right now into the networks. And then you'll be able to see how much Netflix, for example, is being consumed inside of the household. And you can even do analysis to say if the customer has Netflix and they also purchase your video service, then are they watching more Netflix than they're watching your video service? And do they have more set-top boxes from Amazon than they have your set-top box? So you can start to see kind of the trends that are happening, so you can better kind of prepare for that. So it's also about getting analytics about applications and device growth happening on your network at a very pointed level.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. A question on the new features and services Plume is looking to add in the near future. Could you touch on that?
Yeah, so we always have new services that we deploy throughout the year, and then we have a cycle in which we deploy the services. So first we deploy within our retail network. So you always see there as being the first proving ground for applications, and then when we're perfectly happy with the applications and they pass all our standards and tests, then we roll them out en masse to service providers. So we'll be seeing an increase in investment in terms of home awareness. So that's where you're able to see what activity is happening inside of your house through motion detection, and apply that to different applications. So it's not just about seeing motion detection, but where is that motion happening, when is it happening, and what are the trends that you see on that? And that leads to all sorts of different applications that can arise, such as keeping track of elderly parents, for example, you have, and making sure that they're safe and they are moving around in the house at different times. Other places where we go into invest in is more in connectivity. So Wi-Fi 6 is being developed and tested now for us, and that'll be something that we see roll out and force this year and really into next year. And 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi will come next year as well, and that'll open up a lot of spectrum. And so that becomes another area of investment to make sure that we have all the correct Wi-Fi technologies to increase the bandwidth and start to go towards having gigabit per second capacity everywhere around the house with that 6 gigahertz spectrum. And then also backup. So there's a lot of carriers and businesses in which they don't have very good connectivity at some times. And if you lose your connectivity, your life or your business stops. So we are investing in things like LTE backup. So the ability to be able to switch over to LTE and switch back to your primary internet connection when it's available, to avoid any disruptions in your network. And that can be a real lifesaver depending on where you are. So there's a full roadmap of other features we're looking at on the consumer side, and that dives in deeper into advanced parental controls and application monitoring, curbing screen time, addiction, and those things. So we can kind of talk about those doing roadmap sessions with customers, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah. When you obviously the driving force behind the massive increase in data in all the households has been all the OTT services over the last decade. What kind of new OTT services you see on the horizon that will be driving further up the data consumption in and around the home?
Yeah, so video has been the driver for OTT services up to this point. I think we've seen that over the last several years. And I think that'll continue on a more of a linear progression. So as more people move to 4K content and streaming, then 8K will come later, kind of predictably, and then you'll kind of see that continue to rise. We see many more OTT providers coming onto the market, but we don't really expect a kind of like a hockey stick kind of curve on OTT bandwidth. It'll be more linear. I think the applications that we really look forward to seeing how they change are more about the ones that we're having right now. Like you and I are talking over video. It's more of a kind of an upstream bidirectional real-time application. And that's really where we see the applications moving towards. So most of the bandwidth increase we saw during the work time hours during COVID was related to Zoom calls, right? And that's WebEx calls also, and also with Microsoft service. All those video conferencing services were scaling unbelievably fast. And we see that the speed at which they scaled changed also the bandwidth profile to more uplink direction. So we look forward to that disrupting kind of the environment, the way we deploy networks, where we have to invest more in the upstream and less in the downstream, which is a bit of a shift. And maybe in a couple of years, we'll see VR and AR applications start to really make that pop, right? So if you think right now, you and I are consuming a lot of bandwidth in the upstream, it's nothing, right? Just wait for these kind of VR applications to where now we're putting headsets on and we're talking to each other, and we have to send not only just like a small video, but we have to send a whole room video and fast movement, and we need low latency in the upstream direction. That's going to drive a lot of change in the infrastructure.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, probably in interest of time, let me finish off with one more question. Before that, I like to emphasize that I think all participants will receive a TCO study with a lot of insights, and obviously there's a lot of there's enough information to be shared later on as well in individual sessions. But one of the key questions which is popping up is, do you have an indication about which services that Plume offers tends to provide most value from customer perspective? So when you look at adaptive Wi-Fi, security, parental control, etc., how are these really ranked. What's your insight on that from customer perspective?
All right, it's a good question. So definitely from the cornerstone is about getting adaptive Wi-Fi and strong connectivity, and that's not so much about the feature itself. It's about the making sure that the customer is satisfied with the service and they're able to run every service imaginable inside of their home. So that's number one from that standpoint. From engagement standpoint, it's hard to pick a clear winner out of them. So security is a very strong one, and that's really related to most people are used to kind of endpoint security you install on your phone, like an antivirus software. But you can't do that with things like IoT devices, and even installing it on PCs is becoming a bit of a pain to go through and make sure it's installed and kind of keep up with it. So we see a lot of traction there where people want to protect their whole home with a single push of a button, and then they want to be able to see what's happening. So I think that's a good engagement feature, and a lot of people use that also for their children in the form of parental controls. So those people who have children really find good value in parental controls, not just limiting the access, but also the content filtering. And being able to make sure that there's not anything malicious happening on the children's device when they shouldn't be doing things they're doing, such as doing BitTorrent or trying to go to proxy websites to get around that protection. So I think those AI security and parental controls are often used. There's a lot of Airbnb users also of our equipment, and they really like our password security. So if you have somebody coming to visit, stay in your house, you can give them a personalized password that expires when they leave. And you don't have to worry about anybody trying to get access to other devices in your house, because you kind of give them a walled garden of devices they can see. So we get good traction with all the features, but I think the security and parental controls tend to get the most visibility and use.
I'd like to thank you a lot, Adam. I think very insightful and very inspiring. And all I can say is I can really recommend to further elaborate with yourself and with Plume on the options available you guys provide to operators. So thanks a lot for your presentation. Karen, back over to you.
Hi, thank you. That was a really, really great session. It was a fabulous insight to everything that Plume's doing throughout the pandemic and beyond. So thanks, Adam, for a great presentation. David, thank you for superb moderating. And thanks to everyone who got involved with the great Q&A session there at the end as well. What we'll do is I will forward your details over to Plume, and they will follow up with more of an in-depth written response as well. As David said, the TCO study white paper, everybody will get a link by email so you can download the white paper. And a reminder, in case you weren't here right at the start, you can find this webinar recording and past webinars and podcasts on the members only section of ctameurope.com. We'll send out temporary login details shortly to be able to access that area of the site. We've got webinars coming up again. Next Wednesday, we have one from Christian Kurz, SVP Global Consumer Insights at Viacom CBS. So everybody, thank you for joining. Thanks again, gentlemen, for a superb presentation. And thanks everybody for staying on. It proves it was a very good presentation when everybody stayed on. So thank you. This concludes the webinar for this week, and we wish you a great week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.